Hi there, and welcome to the Alternative Insight podcast by the Aztec Group. My name is Jon Ball, and I'm delighted to have been invited back. I did one of these last year, and I was kind of hoping to do another podcast. So I'm delighted to be back here on today's podcast.
Welcome to Alternative Insight, a markets and industry insights podcast from the Aztec Group.
For this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by our special guest. So first one, I've already name-checked her. It's Melanie Collett, who is Managing Director for Private Markets and Investment Implementation at Aviva. Did I get your title right?
Yes, Aviva Investors.
Aviva Investors.
Yes, precise.
To be precise. Okay, that's good. Sorry I missed that. But thank you, Melanie, for being part of it, and delighted you're here. And then we've got David Kane, who we know well. David, Managing Director at Alvarez Marsal. Did I get your title right?
That's fine.
Anything more to it? No, that's good. Okay, so look, a warm welcome to both of you. Before we start, I think, again, it won't be news to anybody that's listening to this that's in private markets, but it's a pretty exciting time. There's never a dull moment within our industry. We know that. But if you look at some of the macro and economic and geopolitical factors that are out there, they will undoubtedly play a part in terms of what we're talking about here. But if I think about the conversations I have with clients, it's around what we're calling really significant shifts in the market. There's a big change in terms of capital and how you raise capital. Obviously, the fundraising cycle has been longer than we're used to. And then, of course, there's been a focus on liquidity back to investors, making sure we're managing investors' expectations and giving them the returns that they want in the time that they want. I think the other thing is that the fundraising periods have obviously extended, but it's then about focus on exit in deal pipeline and deal sourcing, that origination of deals, and the competitive edge to go out there and find those deals. And that's a big factor for a lot of people that we're talking to. There's then things like the retailization, democratization of private markets, and how you then appeal to the diverse range of the types of investors that are out there now. So it's not just about big institutional investors, of course. It's now high net worth individuals, family offices. We're seeing more complex structures with co-investment and continuation funds. And then on top of that, just because complexity isn't, we're not fraught with complexity already, then of course you've got the ever-evolving regulatory landscape. And then, of course, organizations are really grappling with the big issue around data, how you make that work for organizations, you change. And then, of course, things like technology systems and automation and AI. So it's hardly a quiet time. There's loads to factor into some of the conversations today, but they are the macroeconomic and operational challenges I think most people are focused on. So I don't know, Melanie, what you're seeing in terms of Aviva, and given that backdrop and that framing of this, how are you thinking about some of these changes?
Yeah, no, a few thoughts. Well set, scene set. It's fraught with complexity, as you say, and a rather fragmented market. However, what is exciting is the scale and size of the opportunity. And I think, words used in various articles around poised for disproportionate growth. So, that's, we're here and very much firmly on the positive seat. Focus on building businesses that weren't even thought of 2 years ago. So, that pace of change is immense and, again, very exciting. The DC, the wealth market, as you say, different channels of capital coming in. But actually, you've then got to focus on that sort of broader private markets offering. So you are suiting the investment requirements across all of those different personas in the market. So you're delivering sustainable commitment. You've got the Mansion House Compact. You've got VC. You've got private equity. You've got infrastructure. You've got real estate. You've got equity. You've got infra equity. So, you really are trying to build something which is delivering for all of those different investors. And of course, with pace, they want to deal with fewer investment partners. The fee question out there is rife, but actually at the same time, they want excellence and they want that continuity and that consistency across all of private markets. So challenge, but really exciting.
Okay. It sounds like it's busy, Melanie, to say the least. That's really exciting. And what about you, David? Obviously, you see it from not just a client lens, but also sitting at A&M, you get a wide range of view, right? And how some of your clients they're responding to some of these challenges.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think it's well said. I mean, there's headwinds and tailwinds, as there always is, right? We've got a large restructuring business, also a very large deal business. We see it in both ends. Mm-hmm. I think for us is there's pockets of opportunity, but more and more it's deal by deal opportunities, right? So high quality assets, really, a lot of competition for those assets. Good assets, not great assets. The question marks are there. I think that puts the onus on us, right? It's more active asset management. You need to act with conviction. You need to act with discipline. Mm-hmm. You need to have the operating model to support that conviction and discipline, right? To fuel the data insights that you need. So it's interesting time, but yeah, it's here to stay, and it's only getting bigger.
That's good. And just if I can come back to you, David, around some of the more pressing trends that you see, and you've already touched on a few things there, the deal by deal piece, but the real pressing trends and challenges in the market. We talked about opportunity, but what about the side of it?
Yeah, I think from an operating model perspective, there's three main trends that I see, right? One is investor expectations are increasing, right? So, more transparency, faster reporting, more customization, what they're looking for. Retail changes that you both mentioned are only amplifying this, right? So we really need to rethink how we set up the structure. The second is private markets is a global business, right? GPs, managers are a global business, even fund admins, right? International, adding capability in the US, Asia, elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I think where we aren't yet is we have a lot of international businesses, but not really globally integrated businesses. So once again, rethinking the operating model to play with scale and make things simpler. And then third is costs are going up. We mentioned the kind of margin pressure, right? But we always face this constant challenge of scaling without losing control, right? How do you keep what's unique, bespoke for fund managers, for asset managers, teams, right? And make sure you're not kind of just pushing a square peg through a round hole.
It's great. I think that's a brilliant way of putting it, isn't it? You've touched on a couple of things, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later on. I'm going to sow the seed now, so you're both thinking about this as we go.
Sure.
As we've talked about just the huge breadth and complexity of what's going on, it must be really hard to prioritize or deprioritize where you focus your time and energy. To your point around getting scale without losing control. So I'm going to sow that seed, and maybe we'll come back to it, and maybe you can come back to how you prioritize and deprioritize in such a vast range of things that you can focus on. Melanie, given what David was just talking about in terms of challenges and what have you there, how has that impacted your approach at Aviva Investments?
Yeah, it's also worth saying David and I have worked very closely on that sort of productivity and pace and focus for some time on our operating model changes. So we've certainly learned about how you deprioritize and prioritize. So we can share a few thoughts there. But I think importance is around productivity. So I think, you can't be the excellence at everything. So you partner smartly, and then you use your internal talent to add the value, provide that client service, that excellence across all of the facets of private markets. If you think about sort of the public market side, sort of data, benchmarks, modelling, smart technology, analytics have transformed that industry, and we'll definitely be going more to that sort of hybrid public-private model. So it's important that private markets sort of pulls its socks up and get on it. There's a greater sense of urgency, I think, because of the size of the opportunity. I think, there's no optionality anymore. Organisations are really having to think differently about how do they partner, bring in the right expertise and meet the ambition, whether that's the climate ambition or the ambitions of clients. And obviously technology has got a huge part to play. I mean, even just across all of our private markets desks, you've got silos, you've got spreadsheets, you've got, fragmented technology that doesn't speak to each other. But that client's ask is it's one private markets output.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, if the plumbing isn't robust, like reporting isn't timely, right? Mm-hmm. Controls aren't in place. You can't really scale processes. So that's key. And a lot of it is, spending that time up front to define what that North Star is, what the operating model is. Then it's a series of decisions and puts and takes, right? There's not, you've got to give up in some decisions for others, but it's kind of remaining relentlessly focused on what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think I was just going to add that I think Deloitte say that all of the data in the last the data that we need is data of the last 2 years. So you've got to find a way of that dynamism.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good. I'm gonna put you on the spot, David. It's not something prepared, so I'm going to tell you that now. You talked about you've got to invest that time up front. Now I know there's no one size fits all, and it's on a case by case basis depending on what you're grappling with and changes you want to bring on our operation there. But typically, how much time do you need to invest up front? Or maybe you've got an example where you can talk about how much time is invested up front and to help accelerate those decisions to do that prioritization and focus in the right area. Because for me, I was talking with a client yesterday and there was acknowledgement that actually the client themselves probably should have invested more time up front in terms of some of the changes. And that came from the client. And they said they were very open with you about it and said, actually, if we were honest, we probably should have put more time in terms of the op model and the evolution that we were bringing around. So I'm just interested in, is there a kind of a rule of thumb that you take into it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I go back to kind of our example, right? Like usually those like initial assessments where you're trying to set that North Star, the blueprint, that's a 8 to 12 week kind of exercise. A lot of that is syndication and leadership aligned, right? Like it's getting the right people in the room at the right time to make the key decisions and make the key kind of decisions on design principles or guardrails, right? So how do we kind of measure ourselves and what are we trying to achieve? But I've seen it time and time again, and I've seen it with outsourced relationships where it's actually like if you were to just reset the conversation and have a new one and draw it on a blank piece of paper, you probably get there faster and more effective. But instead, you're tinkering with sins of the past, right? So it's spending that time up front, 8 to 12 weeks, really pays dividends in the long run.
Okay.
I think also getting the stakeholders on board, change isn't everyone's cup of tea. But if you're halfway through a project and you're in that sort of messy middle phase where you're not quite sure exactly where you're going, how you're going to get there. You know where you're going, but how are you going to get there? There's frustration, there's cynicism. If you don't have those key people around you totally on board with, right, okay, we're going to get through this difficult phase because that's what we've got to achieve.
I think that's spot on. A lot of people struggle with that, but a program isn't a program unless there's that like messy middle and there's compromises and
you want a bit of healthy tension, I suppose.
You need some healthy tension, and I kind of go back to the initiative we ran where we're trying to put in a deal pipeline kind of workflow system, and one of the tools that we use is you actually don't start with the largest group. We didn't start with the largest desk. We didn't start with the desk that was going to get the most efficiency from the project. We started with the vocal minority, right? I'm not sure if you've heard that concept, but it's how do we have a few individuals that can see the future? They can see the benefits of this tool. They can see how this will really help their teams, help the IC process, help the Monday morning meetings. Have them talk on the floor. They talk about the benefits of this tool, the benefits of the technology, the benefits of the new operating model. And then suddenly we had desks, right, coming to us and saying, when is real estate coming onto this tool? So it's really starting with that vocal minority. And I think Mel made the point on change and tech. And, some people get it wrong. Like tech doesn't deliver value in itself, right? It's success comes when we match tools with effective change management and execution. And that's absolutely critical.
That's really interesting. I've got to pick up on the vocal minority piece because my mind, when you said vocal minority, maybe it's more a reflection of me. I hope my boss isn't listening to this. Vocal minority, I thought you meant the people that perhaps would be quite vocal and opposed to change as you're going through it. What you're talking about is taking the people that would be real agents for change, and evangelists for change, and then getting them to influence the change on the floor with the people that need to go through that process. It's almost sponsoring it and influencing their colleagues through that change. Which is great. Question for you, and this stakeholder buy-in piece is so important, isn't it? Yeah. How do you then influence the people that are perhaps where my mind went to, which is the vocal minority that are opposed to change? Because some of those people are really, really valuable, right? And they have to be a key part of it, but you've got to bring them through that journey and what you're trying to achieve. Have you got any examples of how you've managed to do that, obviously without compromising any colleagues?
Yeah, no, well, funny enough, we just go on to this deal tool, and also making sure that any change is very much linked to sort of the business, the purpose and the value. So when you're doing an RFP, quite a common question is, what's your pipeline? What's your funnel like? How many deals do you turn down?
Yeah.
If you don't put the right data in and the culture isn't sponsored, you don't get the right data output. You lose an RFP, or you don't get the trust because you're not showing the right data, that there is stringent testing around the pipeline and the opportunity that you're going to give that client. So, really want to the purpose of the firm. If we are aligned with Mansion House Compact and net zero ambitions, all of that needs to use technology correctly to create that value. And if you don't deliver the value.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, there's a bit of a carrot and a stick approach to some of these things, right? I think the personas, I love kind of messy, big transformation programs, but the personas we see is the persona that's very resistant to change. They're very good at telling you why it's not going to work, right? There's the persona that, can depict describing problems, depict it, right? Consultants are sometimes guilty of this, right? And then there's people that just get stuff done, right? It's those people that you need to identify and find very quickly. And then, honestly, it's a measure thing as well, right? So programs need to kind of be grounded in success criteria and measurable benefits. So if you can show that, and there's not an alternate solution from the naysayer, then it's kind of get on the train at that point, right?
Yeah, I think, and also, big change, which David talks about, that pre-mortem is really important. And then those incremental check-ins. You might say to me, right, well, so how are you measuring project that we've been working on for like over two years? I'm not sure I'm quite in a comfortable seat of measuring the success. However, we've launched new funds, a number of funds, complex funds, different jurisdictions, carbon removal, venture capital, etc. However, it's worked, and it's only worked because of that discipline, buy-in, and it's not just the incremental pieces of a model, it's the full end-to-end, and it works from the beginning. RFPs, again, now clients are not just interested in the investment side, they want to know, how are you onboarding it? How do you exit? How do you have the risk embedded? So it's really now the challenge is the full end-to-end.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Brilliant. All right, well, thank you ever so much. You mentioned 2 years. You talked about a consulting firm, Deloitte, talking about the data for the last 2 years. What I wanted to ask, and maybe for both of you, but maybe David, if I come to you, from your perspective, how have the expectations on operational excellence evolved over the last 2 years? If we take that 2-year mindset, how has that changed?
I mean, the biggest shift goes back to the first point I made around real-time data, right? And I'm sure you're seeing this from a fund admin perspective as well. Like, we used to live in a world that was centered around batch reporting, and processes were grouped based on a monthly valuation or a quarterly valuation, striking a NAV, right? Now what clients want is, self-service, real-time access. If they want self-service, real-time access, you've got to push as many activities as possible upstream in the calendar, right? So we're seeing more and more firms, daily bookkeeping, daily payments, daily reconciliation. So that Mel and others from a kind of GP perspective can actually hand on that data. The second is operational excellence means more scalable, transparent systems, right? I think technology in this space especially has evolved very quickly. I think I've heard Charlotte say before, it used to be, you made a technology decision and, you looked at it again 5 years later. That's probably 18 months now, right? Yeah. Just because some of the tools that we see in this space. And then third, it's cybersecurity and resilience. I've run a number of kind of large outsourcing mandates, and that's coming more and more kind of
was going up the agenda,
top of list, because they know these firms are getting global and they have different delivery structures, are accessing talent pools in different places. So they want to make sure that resiliency is in place.
Is there a change in hiring decisions as well? So again, if you talk about the last 2 years and some of those focus areas, are you then seeing somebody, organizations bring in specialist talent to deal with that focus? Is that those decisions start to accelerate as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, COVID actually was a great reset for our business as well, right? It kind of showed people that you could access talent in different places, and you didn't have to be sitting on the same floor in those places. So I think you're seeing that. Where can you get a pool of talent that's really good in X, right? Yeah. And getting people to do that, and just getting change agents as well.
That's great. Did I just mention Coplash? Just a side note. I actually bought this suit before COVID, and I was delighted this morning I could fit into it. First time in about 5 years. So it's the first time I actually thought about COVID, and I thought about it twice already this morning. Right, just in terms of Melanie, critical thinking. So we've spoken before about no regret decisions. So as you go through some of this change, how do you apply critical thinking from some of the change that you've brought around operationally? And for people that listen to this podcast, what are perhaps the 2 or 3 things that you would say are absolutely, and you've already touched on some of it maybe, but maybe there's some other depth that you could bring to that and add a bit more colour to it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have touched on a few things, the preparation, the stakeholder engagement, big change versus incremental, and then measuring. And we often are so focused in on the end goal that those incremental pieces are actually improving the business, and the communication is, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but for me, definitely the stakeholder engagement, really making sure you're looking at it holistically end to end. Yeah. You get the right capability in. So we've touched on technology, quants, measurement tools, etc., portfolio construction, illiquidity premia. All clients now are wanting much more data and analytics. And we all had that on the agenda, but actually I think we should have had it much sooner on the agenda, because actually everything else then sort of hangs off that. So I think we've touched on most of it. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but as I said, we're still on the journey. But I'm now much closer to communication on those incremental changes and the impact it's had, and then the client service and the gain that you have via delivering. So
I'm glad that you mentioned gain, because that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is around scalability and efficiency, and how you measure those gains. So I'm really interested, well, hear from both of you, but maybe Melanie, if I come to you first, in terms of how do you look at measuring the efficiency gain effectively, and then more importantly, how do you trace that back to the original use case or business case for that change? Because and it comes back, we've said it a couple of times already, sometimes you can charge into a direction, whether it's technology, whether it's change, whatever it might be, and then suddenly you look back and go, actually, have we fixed the exam question we set out originally? So it's that periodic check-in to make sure that you're still tying back the efficiency gains, measurable, but they're coming back to the original business case and use case. How have you done that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think those checkpoints, we've mentioned about the pace of change and the evolution of private markets a number of times. I think there's 6 times increase in regulatory requirements in the last few years. So, you can't just sit there and look at your end that you set 2 years ago. Those sort of checkpoints are really important. I think, the outsource model, I think, is one that we've had to evolve through those checkpoints, because public markets may be more of a sort of one size fits all, and it's more advanced, but we've already worked through venture capital, carbon removal, trading carbon, et cetera, et cetera. So, you're not going to be able to solve all of that without some expertise around you. So I've really seen the evolution of our partnerships, and it's not just a service agreement that you sign up to day one. There's constant changes and refinement to that. And also it can't be a one size fits all. It can't be this is what you signed up to. You have to have incremental changes for all of the pieces of private markets. So that partnership approach that isn't too rigid. I mean, shout out to Aztec. We've certainly moved more in that sort of hybrid model, built some more capability and expertise within our organisation, but partnered in certain more complex situations where you do need to be refining your approach continuously.
And flexibility, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. No, that's really helpful. And then, so that's how you trace it back to the use case. And then, David, from your point of view, what are you seeing, and how would you think about those efficiency gains, and where you see the biggest opportunities for efficiency gains when you work with some of the clients?
Yeah, I mean, one is consolidating providers, right? So we see managers that have grown capabilities over time become more diversified. They might have small pockets of fund admins, consolidating managers and getting gains that way, right? Really targeting processes that, can scale, right? And can become more efficient and to be automated, right? So really targeting those. But it's really once again, tying it back to a business case and tying it back to a margin. We work with financial sponsors frequently, right? So they have value creation plans. their value creation plans are always embedded into, contribution margin uplift and EBITDA expansion. So it's once again like tracing down the elements and making sure that, you are achieving those outcomes. And I think to Mel's point, it's a big one, right? On big programs, but it's stakeholder engagement, but it's also, communication, talent retention, right? It's communication and celebrating those like incremental successes, because sometimes it gets lost in a big program, right? So, and there's measurable things. It's like time to fund launch, right? So it's like, we tried to do a fund launch 2 years ago. We just did one maybe with Aztec. What was the duration, right? It's like, how can we prove the success of these programs?
Okay. Right. I'm going to ask again, slightly building on what you said, you've talked about partnerships, selecting the right partners to help you change. And by the way, I'm not coming at it from a point of view from Aztec here, right? I'm coming at it far more broadly. If either one of you were going to sort of cite one or two biggest things that you look for in a partner, what are they? What are the things that, because you've talked about communication, flexibility, but is there something that makes it distinctive for you?
I mean, when you were talking there, my brain totally went to people. And, I know COVID was challenging. We did a lot of the groundwork on the project that David and I worked on remotely. I was in Scotland, you were...
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So a pandemic didn't get in the way of your plans?
No,
of course not.
But it was the approach on Teams. It was, that collaboration, work ethic, solution mindset.
Yeah.
And we've evolved our partnership, but, we've gone, I talked about the messy middle, but you've got times when you just really have got to get around the table and think, shoot, how are we going to, when think this was coming our way. So it's definitely people and just, you're in it together and you bond. And I think, going through an RFP, again, we talked about preparation. We went to a number of parties. We did that, Transformation did that very religiously. And there were people that you knew instantly that wasn't going to...
So there's the chemistry and the communication, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's key. I mean, quality is key, right? So it's just like you need to make sure that you're choosing someone with proven expertise, matches up to the structures and the locations that you use, right?
Yeah.
Coverage across asset classes. The second point, which is interesting, and I find it more and more, is technology is now core to these decisions, right? Like 5-10 years ago, people would select it based on a set of services. Now, I hear more and more from GPs that I look to players like Aztec and your peers as a way to access technology, right? And it's how do you provide that, right? There's a lot of technical debt in this industry and teams that have been built up, and suddenly you're struggling to just maintain and upgrade a system when it's like, that was never core to what our business needs. Right? So how did we get here? Yeah. It's that. And then I think it's the strategic alignment, right? So like a true partnership shares roadmaps, your partner should say, hey, this is what's on our product roadmap.
Yeah.
What looks interesting to you? Can you talk to me about, what you're doing in the carbon space, like what you're thinking and, across Europe? Is there ambition to go to another geography? It's matching up that partnership. It shouldn't be an adversarial relationship. Hey, you missed a KPI and like you're late on this. Yeah. It should be more about how do we work together going forward, right? And it's people, because at the end of the day, you don't want to spend time with people that there's just not that cultural fit.
It's interesting. So I met a chap recently who is a chief technology officer. And we were having lunch, and I don't know this gentleman particularly well at this stage, but really getting on well. And I asked the question around technology roadmap, what was in the tech stack, because I was genuinely curious about it.
Sure.
And bearing in mind that was our first meeting over lunch, and I was delighted when this guy actually went, "Let me show you." Whipped out his iPhone and literally over the spot lunch, then started talking through some of the investments, some of the change that we're making as an organisation, but then shared and felt confident enough to share the tech stack. Now, it always amazes me that you can have relationships with clients and you're not sharing. And I thought that was a really good example of somebody being open, clearly very proud of all the investments they've made, brilliant, and of some amazing stuff that they've been doing, but was willing and open to then share that. Because to your point, how can you possibly communicate or partner with people if there's not an element of transparency about your plans? And that goes for us as well when we're working with people. No, you just suddenly...
I was just going to say, it's nice to see you excited by that, because actually sometimes I find people can go, when you start talking about technology and data, and they think, oh gosh, they go to the boring part of that.
Yeah.
But actually, you can talk about a workflow and people switch off. And if they don't document how they want to do something, technology is never going to solve for it.
Yeah.
But then when you show the solution, they go, wow, that's going to save me like hours per week.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just trying to find a way of getting technology and data more into that exciting space than it being seen as a bit cumbersome.
Oh, no, 100%. And some of the use cases that were shared, so obviously I won't share for confidentiality, but some of the use cases that this guy was talking about was absolutely brilliant. It goes back to your point around the speed. It wasn't about monthly or quarterly. It was around daily mecs, daily payments. See, there's the speed. But they genuinely had done a lot of stuff that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And quite rightly, over a bolognese, he wanted to share that. And it was great. So, okay. And we've reciprocated, of course. So let's talk about... cross-jurisdictional one, because you talked earlier, David, about there are plenty of international firms. How do you then become global? You touched on it, but I feel like we need to peel back that a little bit, because whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter about the size of your organization or what have you. Often particularly as we go through change, you can unintentionally create silos, and you can unintentionally disengage certain jurisdictions or certain teams. So in terms of complexities on institution managers and actually how they navigate from an operational point of view, some of that, what have you seen, David? Are there any gems for listeners that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's changing and it will always be changing, right? So we see divergence across regimes, and that adds complexity. We see the burden of multi-jurisdictional filings and reporting. It's something that you have to deal with. But when thinking about your own operational backbone and structure, you really need to think hard about, delegation, delegation teams, how to get that structure correct and up and running. But the real key, and Noah, I think you made this point earlier, is consistency, right? Like, you're building global systems that are locally adaptable, but you want to give that seamless experience to the end client, right? How does the LP feel?
Yep.
And it's the same with, if they're invested in multiple asset classes, they don't care about, they have different administrators for private credit versus infrastructure equity. They want a seamless, consistent experience. And that's what's key when thinking about, cross-jurisdictional global operating models.
Yeah.
Especially when a lot of the funds now have sleeves, Euro sleeves, GP sleeves, infrastructure, real estate.
Yeah.
If you're a client and suddenly you get 3 different reports and you've got to bring them together, you're not going to win much business. So, but it's fragmented, it is siloed. So it's definitely a challenge that we're having to really grab at the moment to make sure that every client gets the same service, no matter what asset class or jurisdiction. But that is a challenge.
All right. Okay. I've got one other question before I do. I kind of telegraphed it earlier in the conversation around prioritization, deprioritization. Is there anything that we haven't covered so far that you really wanted to draw out with this, the unique challenges that institutional fund managers and operational excellence? Is there anything that we've not covered that either one of you want to talk about, or in terms of my question earlier around deprioritization, is there anything that you think would be really helpful that you want to share?
I mean, you do have to be disciplined, without doubt. Performance, you can't drop the ball. So you're having to deliver that in the challenging economic environment, as well as keeping all these other balls in the air.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we talk about the sweet shop, and there's always something shiny out there that you'd love to have a crack at. I think it's really delivering what you've said you're going to deliver and do it well. The sweet will come.
Yeah.
But I think, that's probably...
So 3 Ps, performance.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Melanie, when you set out on this and when you and David were talking during those COVID virtual calls, if you could go back to the Melanie 5 years ago and go, this is the 1 or 2 things that you're going to learn and get huge value from, over the next 5 years as you go through some of these changes? What would they be? If you sort of had a crystal ball and this is what you're going to get out of it.
I guess a degree of discipline we've touched on, measurement, discipline, resilience, without doubt.
Well, how do you do that? So from a resilience point of view, I'm not talking individually. I'm talking about how do you create it in terms of high performance in the work environment through this?
I'm told I'm wired like that, so I don't give up easily.
Okay.
Can be good and bad.
Yeah.
I can confirm that.
Yeah, you concur.
But it's the bringing stakeholders with me on the journey. I knew where I was going, but I think you've just got to always there'll be others that will go, she's never going to get that cracked. But so it's teamwork. I think just in being very open in terms of one learning, if you're allowed to have a regret in life, but I should have stayed closer to transformation in that planning phase versus allowing the sort of project team to go into the room, do all the whiteboarding. I should have said, right, you know what, this is a big project. COVID pressures aside, I need to be in the room and I need to learn the fundamentals of everything. And then I could have...
And why is that? Was that because it gave you that ability to learn and be there from the start of the journey right the way through, sense of ownership and really getting...
And I knew the business inside out.
Yeah.
And not rely on a project team to document it. You learn so much more in the room on the whiteboard.
I think that's a really good bit of insight. Thanks for sharing that, right? Because as you said, my daughter always says to me, Dad, you never win. You never lose. You only win or learn. Have you heard that one before? As my 16-year-old daughter keeps quoting that back to me, which is quite refreshing. But I think, thanks for sharing it, because it is that, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of people that will be listening to this. I think we see this at Aztec as we go through it, where the people that really understand the issue and understand what you're trying to grapple with and get to an ideal future state with need to be in that process rather than passing the baton over and then expecting something to come back. And I think a lot of our clients would empathise with that. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, because it's really honest.
I got there, but it took me longer, but having not been there at the beginning. Yeah. It's the preparation again.
It's the old fun.
Yeah. And I think it's acknowledging the reality, right? Which is no one's at a point where we can draw it up on a blank piece of paper. You kind of have to live with some things that are in place, and it's acknowledging and understanding that reality. But it's, as Mel said, it's syndicating and aligning and getting the right people in there and up front.
What about you then, David? So same question to you. So Melanie's obviously reflected in the last 5 years. What about you? If we went back and said, actually, David, working with Melanie, working with the team, this is the one thing you're going to learn or you can take out.
I'd probably not start a project of COVID and have us all in the room to do it together.
That's
quite challenging.
Yeah. Challenge. Yeah.
That's quite challenging. No, I'd echo her points, right? I think it's just spending more time. But it's convincing those people that they need to be in a room.
Yeah.
Right? Because some people don't understand transformation program constructs. Like, we need to turn business requirements into technical requirements, and then we implement those. How many stakeholders on the fund management team are really going through the business requirement catalog?
Yeah.
Right. So it's those types of sessions, and I think spending more time on the why and explaining the why.
Yeah.
Helps.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah. No, I think focusing on the why is really important. So we often talk about what we're going to do.
Sure.
Like we talk about how.
Yeah.
We talk about the purpose and why we're trying to achieve it. Which I think, going back to that point around the vocal minority, whether they're coming at it from a place of positive or skepticism.
Yeah.
Them understand the why is really important.
Yeah, and I think technology will help on that, because people see, actually, if I do that, I gain a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I feel like we could carry on talking for probably another hour, but I know neither one of you have got that time, so we're going to wrap it up pretty quickly. I've got one other question, which is, I love this one, which is looking ahead. If you look at the next 3 to 5 years, which feels like a really long time in private markets, doesn't it? In our industry, 3 to 5 years, it feels like a very long time. So you might want to shorten up that time frame. But if you look at that, what do you see as the next frontier in terms of innovation and operational excellence and the change for institutional managers and maybe non-live?
Looking ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've touched on public, private, hybrid. I've touched on the DC market, even rethinking how you actually, surplus cash, how you actually share cash with these different investors is evolving at pace. I think they talk about AI to transform every facet of a business within the next 18, 24 months. So there's a lot coming our way, and also the expectations are evolving. So it's not just anymore around return on investment, projections, we talked on financial performance and KPIs. It's those non-financial reporting. It's the government, it's the regulatory network change. So, it's critical that you're a differentiator by delivering all of that.
Yeah.
And that all of that is fine-tuning weekly.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Superb.
I mean, there's so much change. It's hard to have a clear view at this point. I mean, we're clearly at this point where it's massive productivity shifts, right? With AI. I think innovation will come off the back of fixing some of the data problems we had in private markets. We don't have the luxury of being connected to market participants. There's bespoke deals, and we need to change that, right? Getting data sorted. I don't think the money and the investment actually would be going into applications. It would be more on data. And then I think all the messy things that we deal with day to day will become simpler, right? So like looking at a CRM system that you can actually take action on. Yeah, that would be nice. Some seamless onboarding. Yeah. Should be easy. It's not easy, right? Yeah, it's reporting, and it's using AI for more predictive risk management, analytic type concept. So I think it will become clear, but it's very hard to kind of predict because so many things are moving right now in our world. Yeah. But it's an exciting place to be for sure.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, look, first of all, thank you ever so much. Thanks for being part of the podcast today. We have run out of time, but I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope our listeners have as well. So a big thank you to both Melanie and David. Please do make sure that you like, subscribe, and share the podcast. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. I've waited years to get on Spotify, but it's not through music or that. It's through Aztec Podcasts. We've got Apple Podcasts, and wherever you watch and listen to this podcast, please enjoy it and do share any feedback you have with us on it. I just want to wish you both the best of luck with all of the changes, and maybe we'll regroup at some stage and reflect on what the second half of 2025 had for us. But big thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Alternative Insight, a podcast series from the Aztec Group. Please subscribe to the Alternative Insight podcast to receive further updates and insights as soon as they're released.